There we go. Okay, so welcome all of you in the panel and also people watching us on Facebook at the moment. So happy to have you all here and to explore this topic together. First of all, I'd just like to give a brief introduction to how the idea of this panel discussion came to be. So my name is Josephine. I'm a student at Lund University studying environmental management and policy. And this past year, I've been involved in pushing Lund University to advance their sustainability commitments with Wilhelm, among others, who will introduce himself in a little bit. And sometime around Christmas last year, we heard about an old professor of mine in Canada who just recently resigned due to his university's refusal to divest from fossil fuels. And that made us start thinking of activism within academia. Is there such a thing? Should there be? And if so, in what shape? And we thought about whether what we did as students or as researchers in order to bring about change at our university, in the lecture hall or through the choices we made in what we studied or researched, could that be activism? Or is maybe academia not at all the right place for activism to take place? So that was the questions that we started to bounce. We thought about what distinguished universities from other arenas where activism potentially could take place. So here we are today then, exploring this topic, maybe getting a bit closer to those questions. And the hope is that we can share experiences and views and maybe tips on activism within academia. And we have a very interesting panel with us today. Researchers and students from Lund University. It's Kimberly Nicholas, Associate Professor at Lund University Center for Sustainability Studies. Yes. Martin Jarenmark, a research engineer at the Department of Geology. Milan Lewis, a master's student at the International Institute for Industrial and Environmental Economics. Josephine Sakis, PhD student at the Division of Ethnology. Lisa Cardy, bachelor student in literature, and Stephen Curtis, PhD student at IIII, I believe. That is the institute I mentioned just before. And we will involve you guys in a little bit. Just before that, quickly going over the plan for the coming hour and a half. So over to you, Wilhelm.
Perfect. Thank you, Josephine. So my name is Wilhelm Wanschek. I'm also a student at Lund University studying computer science. For the past year and a half, I've also been involved in urging the leadership of Lund University to take a more active role in a transition towards a sustainable society. I'm also the co-host of this event together with Josephine, and I thought I'd present the agenda for today. So we will begin with a round of prepared addresses from all of the participants, where they will briefly present themselves, how they understand the concept of activism within academia, and any experiences they have of doing things that fall under this description. After this, that will be followed by about a 30-minute panel discussion centered on activism in order to influence the operations or activities of the university, activism within education, and activism within research or through research and studies. After that, we will open up for questions. You're more than welcome to ask any questions in the Facebook chat or the Zoom chat. We will finalize everything with a round of just key takeaways. That should in total take us about 90 minutes, with 30 minutes of those being the questions. So we'll be done by half past 5 in CET. Before we start, we'd like to simplify things. We've defined activism. We're using the Cambridge Dictionary definition of activism, which is the use of direct and noticeable action to achieve a result, usually a political or social one. And we'll use this as a starting point for our discussions, not to end up in a definition game too much, but we can also, of course, alter that definition as we go. Well, now over to Josephine and the addresses.
Yes, so let's start off with the panelists giving us some 5 minutes of introduction to their way into this topic. And we would like you to to describe how you understand the concept of activism within academia. How could or how should it be interpreted from your point of view, as well as experiences you might have that can fall that could fall under that description. Yeah, so let's start with Kimberly.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks so much to the organizers for having me. I also had to start with looking up the definition and found a similar one, fortunately, so we are all on the same page, campaigning to bring about social or political change. And I think that Lund University is the perfect place to conduct activism because our university mission is to understand, explain, and improve the world. So we are really bound by our duty in both education and research and teaching and outreach, those core missions of the university, not just to discover new knowledge, not just to convey it to each other, to our colleagues and students learning from each other, but also to put it into practice in the world and to be working towards a better world. I think that is especially true in my field of sustainability science, because almost 20 years ago now, the discipline was founded by Kate's and other colleagues writing in the journal Science. And there they wrote about these principles for this new discipline of sustainability science. And it was really a goal from the beginning, both to understand the connections between people and nature, which are essential to sustainability, but also to bring about and encourage more sustainable trajectories, recognizing, okay, humanity is not on the right course right now. We are dangerously overusing resources like the safe operating space of our climate. And there's really strong social demand to make changes. So I really see it as core to my work as a sustainability scientist to try and be putting changes into practice. We have international democratically developed agreements like the Paris Agreement, like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that all nations have signed and stand behind, with one notable exception with the Paris Agreement at the moment, but even so at the federal level, there is still overwhelming support at the local and state levels and from universities, for example. So basically the citizens of the world want to live on a planet where both people and nature can thrive. And I think we have a duty to help deliver that planet. So I have gotten to be more and more of an activist myself through my career. I think I was inspired by a talk actually in I think 2012 or 13, I want to say maybe 14 even, by Bill McKibben, who was a co-founder of the non-NGO 350.org. And they have stood behind a lot of activism in the climate space, especially the Fossil Free campaign, which Lund University has a local chapter of that I've supported for a long time, trying to get the university to divest our money from the fossil fuels that are endangering our climate. And Bill McKibben said, those of you, I think the most active activists out there should be tenured professors. What do you all have to lose? And I thought, he is really right. I have worked for a long time and jumped through a lot of hoops to get this position of privilege and power, and I should really be using it to put the knowledge that we have into practice and try to actually make these changes happen in the world. So I have behind me on the wall here the protest sign that is getting quite beat up now because it has been to many protests since 2014 when I first made it. That was the year that some of my students invited me and I decided to join my first climate protest. And I sat for a while at my kitchen table thinking, I have no idea what to put on a protest sign. I'm a scientist. I'm not an activist. What are my political demands? And then I thought, okay, I'm going to make a footnoted protest sign because I always talk about the need to back up claims with evidence. So here are the footnotes behind these claims. It's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, we can fix it. This is what science tells us. There's overwhelming scientific agreement about these points. It's important that social decisions are made with a solid background from science, and science really can help guide the way, I think, in terms of what is necessary, especially when we have this very narrow window left where we can actually stabilize the climate below potentially catastrophic warming. So basically we know we have to stop burning carbon and adding it to the atmosphere if we want a safe and stable climate. And we're really the last people alive who have this opportunity because the window is almost closed now. So the next 10 years are absolutely critical for the climate and ecological emergency. And for students who are going into this field now, I think they're very well aware of that. It's not just an academic sort of abstract interest, but also a real sense of urgency and demand for action that we see from the students. And I really appreciate that push. I think universities have historically played a very important role in social change. Looking back over history, that is definitely true now in the climate and ecological emergency. And I think certainly Lund University is, for example, a member of the Swedish Climate Consortium that has pledged to meet 1.5 degrees of warming. And that requires very ambitious, very urgent, radical emissions reductions starting now. So we certainly need all the push we can get from students and from faculty. I think that's my time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And then maybe speaking about the push from students, I'll leave the word over to Milan.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, thanks for organizing this event and thanks for having me as well. And before I would like to share my thoughts about what activism is, I think it is good to shortly introduce myself and give some background information, because I think this is necessary to contextualize what I'm going to talk about. So before coming to Lund University, I studied a bachelor's program in Germany at a university that was back then perceived or presented as one of the most sustainable universities in Germany, and that had a certain responsibility for the needs of society. So this is why I chose this university. And I set up together with some friends a sustainability bureau that was student-led after 3 or 4 years of lobbying for this bureau and developing concepts, talking to different peoples and trying to show why I think it is needed. And so this bureau had 2 main aims. Firstly, it was to realize and to promote the university's commitment to sustainable development. And secondly, we supported student initiatives in their voluntary engagement to make their projects, their voluntary projects, more impactful. So in that work, in that voluntary engagement, I think I have about three main definitions what activism for me personally in academia is. It is at first students that get out or escape the predefined structures of their programs, and that take time and find their passion for what they're studying and trying to connect that to a bigger goal that universities are trying to pursue, like finding the truth or promoting peace in the world or promoting health. And then also to take considerations of other fields into perspective, but also the civil society interests. So what I feel is really important is that students as well do like a double movement. They try to see what is important for our world to improve and then try to tie it back to their studies. And this leads me to my second point, that is that students, from my perspective, should assume responsibility for their studies, which I think they do. But for me, this also says that you have to critically reflect what you want to learn and also voice your concerns if you have concerns and try to make a change within your program or within your university. And as a third overall definition, I would say students today can play a vital role in holding universities accountable for the commitments they have made to contribute to the society's good, but also to hold them accountable for the values they promote, so for finding truth or for creating a peaceful world. And as I've told you, I worked a lot with social initiatives or with student initiatives. And my experience there was that a lot of students have brilliant ideas and they can organize around certain topics like providing medical services for homeless people or helping refugees to integrate into society. And I think that universities should play a greater role in giving students an opportunity to live this engagement, and also to bring it back into the study program and see what is really relevant in a real life context, and then integrate that into curricula, but also into the goals of universities. Yeah, and besides that, I've been very active in Oikos, and that's an initiative that tries to integrate sustainability into the curricula and yeah, further develop yeah, educational programs. But I think we can talk about that later too.
Yes, hopefully we will get back to that. Thank you very much, Milan. I will then hand over to Martin.
Hey, hi, yes. I was also not very aware of the definitions and so on of activism before I was contacted about this. And I never really saw myself as an activist. I always thought that I would make, if I would make an impact, it would be through just doing science. And my background is actually in chemistry, even though I now work at the Department of Geology. But I thought that I would be engaged in, maybe technology development or basic science that, would help that cause. And I've always felt that it's very important to have a deep understanding of a subject rather than maybe having a clear opinion or a direction or an aim. And sometimes, having a very deep form of understanding can actually hinder activism because you're kind of making the whole thing complex. You're trying to see all the different angles of a problem. So you don't make it, in activism, it's often beneficial to have a clear, simplified aim that you can work against. So sometimes I feel that, or from this perspective, I sometimes feel that scientists should maybe avoid activism in a way, although I've changed my mind a great deal about that. But it's important to have this deep understanding that is not biased in, from a political perspective, for instance. And then that this deep understanding can inform others that can be activists in that sense. But I have actually changed my mind quite a bit, and I realized that since scientists are also people, and we have values and feelings, and are often have a desire to improve society. We really, many go into science for that reason too. So it would be a waste of talent and people, and this deep knowledge would sort of be wasted in a way. So I've moved more towards thinking about a diversity of activism within academia. So I feel it's important that there are still people that are non-activists that can take a step back and try to be independent, non-biased, although no one is really perhaps completely non-biased. But then I agree with Kimberly, for instance, and Milan, that we really need to have these highly active people that know a lot and know what changes that we can make, and work for that. So I categorize that as like a hard activism. But then I also feel that it's important with this more soft activism, sort of in the camp where I would consider myself now, which would be sort of like a bridge between a non-activist and the hard activists. So I've not been engaged in activism really before, but then when I started realizing that these, climate change and sustainability issues will not be solved by technology, we really need fundamental other changes. me and friends started, thinking about what we can do. And on a New Year's Eve, we discussed, some things. And my wife, or Cohab, she actually came up with the idea of we should use our flex time instead of going on a strike like Fridays for Future and these things. We should just use our flex time to show, be active. And first we thought it sounded pretty weak because we're not really prepared to sacrifice anything to save the planet. But I later thought it's a really nice bridge between, people that are heavily engaged and people who are not engaged. But we need this kind of step. So when we thought about this using flex time as university employees, the name Flex for Future came up, of course. So that's something that I've been involved in and starting now, and that's we're trying to make more easy demonstrations first Friday every month, and we just make a march down to the Stortorget in Lund and join the Fridays for Future. We're trying to make it just a very easy thing, easy to get engaged and just easy to show that you care. And it should be very positive and inclusive so that anyone feel that they can actually just join in a walk, basically, and become a tiny activist for just an hour, maybe on a lunch on a Friday. And it shouldn't influence work. You shouldn't have to feel that you're sacrificing those things. Yeah, I think that's basically my take on activism. Yeah.
Cool, thank you very much. And I hope to get back to Flex for Future, as well as this idea of academia then maybe being a bridge, in a sense, between soft and hard activism. Over to Lisa then.
Yes, thank you for this great initiative. I am Lisa Quartri, and I am a student at Lund University studying literature. And my take on this discussion is maybe also a little different because I do not have experience of activism within academia, and I do not study like sustainability related subjects or research. I have though been engaged in activism within social movements, both for climate change and also other fights. And I have also been trying to do some activism through art and especially theater. But I am though a student at Lund University, and therefore I could of course try to do activism at my university or within the academian context. But I have not been doing that. And now when I was asked to join this discussion, I thought about why, and why this context isn't like the first place where I think of myself doing activism or choose to try to make change within. And I think there is many answers to that. First of all, I think that I come from like a context or a community where activism is really like associated with like social movements, and
I think we lost Lisa there for a little while. Let's say thank you for now, and we'll get back to your points. And I will invite Josephine.
Yeah. Okay. So I think like all of you, I'm a bit overwhelmed by the hack, but I will try to just continue. Thank you so much for inviting me to join the panel today. And it's been interesting to hear the thoughts from all of you who presented. I will also start briefly to just tell a little bit about who I am and where I come from, because I come from I'm a doctoral student at the ethnology and at Lund University, and I am not, as some of you, engaged in activism as such. My doctoral project is, but it's rather new to me to engage in activism concerning environmental and climate change. Before, I've studied how people respond to phenomena such as the migration situation in 2015 in Europe, and which also concerned activism in a way. And now I'm studying how people in Sweden respond to the current environmental and climate change agenda. And as part of that, I've also looked at how people within academia respond to these issues. And this is more of a side project for me, so it's not my main project, but I've been interested. I became a part of a group at my department at Lux, a climate group that works to change the way we engage as researchers or as administrative staff. And from there on, there was this breakout group of 3 researchers who started to work on a travel policy for the whole department. And that is, you could say, that's my focus when we talk about activism within academia. It is to look at these researchers who are currently working to do this travel policy of our own. You could say they feel that there is a need to have some policies for each department in order to make it more easier to adapt to, you could say. So in that sense, I think these department policies will make it easier to integrate within the different cultures of the different departments. And from there on, I think my understanding of activism within academia comes from that study. So I don't have this broad definition. I think I will instead I look at how these 3 work together in order to create this policy. And I think what I have seen here, this is maybe 1 and 2 that will go a bit together in terms of experience, is that activism becomes a cause that you have to work for. You can't let others, you can't sit around and wait for others to do the work. As one of my informants said, one of these 3 researchers, she said, I asked them why they did it, and she said, I had to take responsibility. She talks about responsibility as a part of activism. Otherwise, I would be full of self-despise. It's obvious that I must do something. Besides, nobody else at the department would do it. So I think there are 2 points that are important for me. Is first of all the responsibility, who will do it, and she sees that nobody else will do this job of changing the structures, the routines of our doings as researchers. This concerns very much the travels of how we travel as researchers. And the second one is how this is something that she cannot sit and wait around for somebody else to do it. She needs to do it, otherwise she will be full of self-despise, as she says. So I think there are many nuances of activism when we talk about why people engage in activism also within academia. I think we've heard a lot of good examples or concepts of this. And I think for my study, I look at this, how responsibility plays a huge role, and how or why they as researchers feel this strong responsibility for making these changes, which I mean, there is a lot of work on policies for the whole university, but why do they feel compelled to do this on department level, and also the work that the negotiations this creates with the leadership and with colleagues, and how this also changes their social engagement at the department. That's really interesting. So I think activism is something that entails responsibility, but also entails working for a cause that is more important than a good reputation, for example. That is at least what my study shows so far, and what I want to share with you now. Yeah, so I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Josephine. Then I will leave to our last panelist, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, as we sit here together, facing many challenges, whether it's the climate crisis or coronavirus, I'm reminded just how privileged we are in many ways to have the opportunity to deal with these challenges in the way that we do, as opposed to so many who have maybe not the same opportunities. And I think with privilege comes great responsibility. And so in that sense, I want to echo what Josephine has just said in sharing her experience. I mean, we all have a responsibility based on the privilege and power that we have in academia to try and make the world a better place. I think before I introduce myself, I just want to ask a question, I guess, of you all to reflect upon. You know, maybe if you're writing your master's thesis, or if you've ever done any type of literature review, maybe you've also found this. The more that you read something, the more confusion or questions you have, right? And I think that's partly because the sustainability challenges we face are so multifaceted. They're so complex, and they require thinking and understanding things from so many different disciplinary perspectives. And ultimately, it becomes an issue of values, of priorities, in terms of how do we prioritize local impacts versus global impacts, or more immediate impacts versus future impacts. And these are really questions of priorities. And I think that this really resonated with me when Martin said that, right, this deep form of understanding that we often are able to try and secure through our research and through our education, this often hinders activism, because it's almost the more that we know, the more that we understand the limits of our knowledge, right? And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge how sensitive some of these issues are, and how we as scientists respond to communicating about them. We often deal with these in terms of probabilities or likelihoods, and sometimes that's difficult to translate into the real world. So something I think for us to be aware of. Now, maybe I just say a few words about myself. So my name is Stephen Curtis. I'm in my 4th year of a PhD here at Lund University, and I'm researching the sharing economy. And just to give you an example, you know, I've spent 2 years of my PhD trying to define what the sharing economy meant. And I mean, it is an ongoing and evolving process that requires a lot of self-reflection, and I certainly doubt myself in my own research, and maybe you can relate to that as well. I think one thing then that we see, right, is that the people in positions of authority or power sometimes use that power to push certain agendas. And I think we see that in the sharing economy, where, you know, the majority of research even is on Airbnb and Uber. And we can question whether these are parts of the sharing economy. So, you know, I often think about then, well, what is the role of academia in society? These are questions that I, as a young researcher, have had to deal with. And so this brings me to the kind of 4 things that I want to share with you, and how I approach or understand my role as a researcher and as an activist academic. So the first is, I think, in the work that I do, and that's something that I think we all need to do, is maybe slow down a little bit. You know, and there's so many challenges that we face within ourselves, given the sustainability crisis we face, that sometimes we have to cope and support ourselves and support each other. And I think with slowing down and questioning the pace in which we're asked to work and produce, it also means that we have the opportunity to discuss our values, right? So this is the second thing that I think is important. is by discussing our values as individuals, as groups of people, whether students or researchers, as institutions like Lund University or even that of academia, we're able to make the impact that we want because we've brought it into an awareness where we can be intentional and deliberate. So for example, I think one of the things that I've tried to do is think about the value that I want to bring as a researcher, and that's making an impact in trying to reduce consumption through advocating business models that are more likely to lead to sustainability impact. Well, how do I do that? I think that's then the issue really is to discuss the pathways for making that research impact. And there are a multitude of pathways, and I think from what I've heard the panelists thus far summarize that there's what did Martin say? A diversity of activism within academia, from hard to soft approaches. And I think we all have to find what approach works best for us. And I think that to do that, we have to consider two things, and that's credibility. What do we feel we have the credibility to speak to based on what we're comfortable with, based on our knowledge base? And then also our messaging. What impact pathways are we able to leverage within the privileged space of academia that can actually make the impact that we wish? So just some examples of the work that I'm doing in this way. Many of you know or may know I'm the co-host of a podcast here at our institute called Advancing Sustainable Solutions. And it's my way of trying to make an impact with the research that we have. And I see this as a direct or noticeable action to arrive at an outcome, this definition of activism, which we've talked about. I think it's also then important to translate our research into outputs that can be directly used by the people that it's intended for. So instead of just making publications or writing a master's thesis, think about how can we actually get the knowledge in the hands of people that are able to use it meaningfully? So just an example, I've turned one academic paper into a 48-page workbook for sharing platforms to try and integrate ideas on how to make their business models more sustainable. And the idea is to then provide this to sharing platforms and get that knowledge into the hands of people that can use it. So I guess I agree with much of what's been said. I think that the discussion really needs, or where I'd like to see it go, is to focus on specifically how can we as students, as researchers in academia, really seek to support each other in developing specific strategies to be activists in our own way. So with that, I say thank you and look forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you all for those amazing addresses. As a starting point, I thought we'd like to discuss a bit around activism done to influence the activities or the operations of universities. And I thought I'd pick up a few points from Martin with your experience from Flex for Future, which you spoke a bit briefly about, and maybe you can explain a bit more what that is. I'm interested in if you believe that the energy invested in influencing the university in itself is meaningful, constructive, or do you believe that it's more important to maybe spread the information among researchers and create an activist spirit among yourself, and if those are two opposing things? Martin, if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, so sorry, can you just repeat the last part there?
Absolutely. I was wondering if you believe that investing energy into influencing the university itself is meaningful, or if you believe that that energy instead should be directed towards, well, research or, for example, influencing industry or other aspects of society.
Well, of course, both are important, and it's also part of this diversity of approaches that you should work on all angles, and you need, of course, then many people to be engaged to work in different directions, because I definitely feel it's important to influence the university to do more. And I think the students' organizations are doing a great job there. And I felt a little bit like Lund University employees can do even more to be more visible, you know, and helping also push that, influence university. But then also at the same time try to reach the rest of the community and showing that we are actually engaged. You know, university, there are many people at the university who wants to do things, and we need to show the world that we are on the train. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Did you raise your hand, Stephen? Oh. Okay, perfect. Then I'll continue on maybe to Milan, who has, as I said, a different take on the as a student. I mean, you have learnings from having pushed for change as a student with a very outspoken goal to influence the university itself, both at Lund University in the Sustainability Action Plan, but also at the University of Witten. With this in mind, do you also believe that it's meaningful to direct activistic actions at the university, or do you, as a maybe future researcher, instead want to focus on your research? Do you see those as two opposing things, or can they integrate to form something even better?
No, I wouldn't say that they are mutually exclusive. I would say it is absolutely worthwhile to invest energy into influencing universities, and I believe so because yeah, at some points in my engagement, I experienced that things can happen quite easily. So, as for example, with the sustainability plan, where Lund University asked students to contribute, we as students have the time to develop ideas, and if we get the chance to present them to the board or to whatever committee, sometimes we're taken as credible critical thinkers, and our thoughts get incorporated into the university's structure, and that can change something because it can either frame a discussion or it can lead to the uptake of new goals or of more stringent goals. So I think it is really worthwhile. On the other hand, it can also be frustrating because it takes such a long time to make a change, and especially in universities, processes can be quite low. So yeah, I think that there's always another possibility to do something else, but yeah, it's also difficult to figure out what point to tackle the best. And I think that there isn't really a solution to that, but also something like intuition for what you feel like you can achieve in a moment.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I was also thinking about then something for Kimberly. I know you had a research project going called Decarbonizing the SFAC, which is faculty at Lund University. I was wondering if that's a way of using your research to influence the university itself. Would you maybe like to reflect a bit about that?
Sure. I think there's lots of interesting and important research to be done in actually putting into practice the necessary changes at the social level, first and foremost within our own house at the university. And we do have policies and goals in place to pursue that, even though they're not yet reality. So we know that we need to do much more at the university. That particular project that you mentioned was led by my colleague Hervé, and actually was not really funded, unfortunately. So we haven't come too far with it, and I think that is a bit of a risk. It's difficult to get financial support to do the work that is necessary. So a lot of the time, the work ends up being on evenings and weekends and from other budgets, basically. So I think that's something to think about. I mean, that's probably drawing from a very long and proud history in activism, that it's necessary work, as others have said, that people feel compelled to do and see as important and valuable. But it can be hard to make the centerpiece of a research program, for example.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Josephine, do you want to continue?
Sorry, could I say something? Sorry, I'm not on the panel.
Okay.
But my name is Christian Unger, and I'm the chair or co-chair of the Carbon Neutral University Network, and we're based at the University of Sheffield. I also did, as a bit of history, I am not actually working at the university anymore, but I'm still the chair. I did study engineering, and I did a PhD in Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute a while back. And when I came here, now I'm in Sheffield University, I was studying biomedical science, and within 3-4 years we started sort of on the side this project of the Carbon Neutral University Network. Basically, I haven't had any background on sustainability, but I got involved in it via my partner at the time, and started to apply some of the scientific knowledge I had on relearning about sustainability. We did the research, the basic research, not being a sustainability researcher, and then got more people involved. And one of the early questions we got to after about a year or so was that, what can we do and where can we do it? And the university seemed to be the first and best place to do it, and particularly because universities are sort of a microcosm of like a little country, if you like. You have sort of a similar little government, a council, and they're making decisions based on that. And you wonder at the time that even though we have very good research on sustainability, on carbon emissions, but actually very, very little is implemented within the university. I mean, this has changed a little bit now, but it was very important at the time. So 2014, 2015, we started. We did the research, and we did the research thing, or the scientist thing, is to provide resources. And we do have a website, carbonneutraluniversity.org, where we started to collect things when.
Thank you, Christian. Hopefully we can talk more about carbon neutrality in a little bit. I will just cover some more points, and then we'll open up the space for other inputs just in a little bit. I thought of, based on what you just said, Kimberly, that makes me think of also Josephine's area of topic, since you also very much are in a sense researching this that we are talking about. Would you, and this is something that I actually would like to ask all of both our researchers and students in the panel, do you see it meaningful to think of your research, say, as activism? If we start
it's a good question. I think I've discussed this a lot with my supervisors, whether it's activism or not, and I think it can be a contribution. I think for my doctoral project, what I've met is I've been studying people who engage in alternative farming methods, and many of those people, they have been engaged in research before, and they felt that they couldn't really do anything. They couldn't really change things. And that's really interesting, as I'm there doing ethnography as a researcher and having that response that they left research because they felt like they couldn't make the changes. A bit like Martin said, they had the deep knowledge about, the deep understanding about what the issues are, but they really didn't have the tools to make the changes. And I think also, as Stephen said, that I think we need to come across just publishing. I think that publishing and doing research is one thing. And I think another thing is also setting a good example, as the group I'm studying, the Climate Council at Lux are trying to do. They really want to change the habits of the department and the habits of the researchers. So this includes, like, they are pain in the ass, to put it right, for the other colleagues, because they want to have policies on on how to travel, where to travel, to get permission to travel with airplane, and that really bothers their colleagues, because it takes out the convenience of being a researcher. Flying to Stockholm is super convenient for many researchers who are super busy, but taking the train might be the new possibility. So they really challenge our routines and our habits as researchers, and that can be really annoying, actually. So that's maybe, I don't know, maybe we can have that discussion at some point, but can we do too much as researchers? I think there's one thing that's the research we do. Yeah, it might be activism, but I think activism, the things we can do as researchers lies also within the practical ways of being a researcher. So which conferences do we go to? Do we accept missing out on things? And do we accept that things will take longer? Or can we also negotiate presence? Let's say this is also a negotiation of presence. We would like to be there in present with each other, but can this be a negotiation of presence as researchers? So I think it's twofold in a way. There is the hardcore research and the publications, but there is also the practical side of being a researcher, which I think is super important and which I think haven't been addressed that much when we talk about sustainability research. I don't think that our engagements, our practical work as researchers has been touched upon. And I think that's also the tricky thing for us, because it also means that we need to leave some of our comfort and our convenience. Yeah.
What are your views on that, Stephen, of research potentially being activist, and also maybe referring to what you said about slowing down?
Yeah.
Is slow research activism?
There's actually a book about this, and if you haven't read it, I recommend. It was an enlightening read towards the beginning of my PhD about slow academia. And yeah, I think that we need to distinguish, though, between the role of the researcher and the role of the university, because I think both have potential to engage in activism. And I think that maybe some are easier. And I think, Kimberly, you mentioned this, and this illustrates the point, right? I mean, we often, maybe those of us that have the energy, the time, or the passion to engage in activism, we do so, but largely to our own, on our own time. It's not necessarily funded. It's not necessarily appreciated by our departments. It certainly doesn't necessarily help our career development. But yet we do it. And I think if we want others to engage, we need to open up the space to do so. So I think that then is the role of the university. But I think that there are too many issues that plague the university in actually taking on that role. And again, we talk about funding. Not only is there not funding available for Kim and colleagues to seek how to try and decarbonize faculty at Lund University, but funding responds too slowly, oftentimes, to the challenges that we face. You know, when is sustainability research going to get funding to deal with the coronavirus and how to rebuild our society? I mean, there's some small research being done on this, but in order to actually have the time to do that, that requires an agile funding process. Or we need to value people and research beyond just publications or citations. And so I'm happy to talk about activism as a researcher, and there's certainly a role there, but I think we also need to talk about how academia as an institution needs to transform in order to take on, or better take on, that role of contributing knowledge for activism's sake.
Thank you for those interesting thoughts, Stephen. I would like to ask you, Lisa, as a student studying literature that's not necessarily, it's like about sustainability, at least not explicitly. I would like to ask, how do you look upon this potential conflict between complexity and activism as an activist?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because what we've been talking about now is like like through the research and what you study or teach. It's about like finding a way of doing activism with what you know, kind of what you do in a way. And I have been thinking about that a lot also when I've been working with art in different ways, and also now with literature, because it's like I've been always believed that we can all use our different skills to contribute to whatever cause we want to contribute in. But I think it's interesting now with the climate change issue, because it's really it's a complex thing that is so much about time and so much about like finding a solution, like Kimberly was speaking about in the beginning, that we really need to do this over this like next 10 years to face this. And then I don't really know anymore, because I mean, one answer could be like, of course, literature could be one way of dealing with this. What is written is really a great part of like the information in society, and if you write like literature, like poetry or novels, for example, then you can use like emotions to create or bring up thoughts to people. So I think that could be an answer. But now I have been more and more like, I don't know, I haven't really I don't really know anymore how, if it's enough to just contribute with what you have, or if there is like one way to do this. And I don't know what way that could be, but I mean, there are like propositions from, for example, like the movement Extinction Rebellion, which say that if we have like the one solution is civil disobedience, coordinate throughout the world, and everyone do this same thing at the same time, and that is the only thing that can make a real impact. And I don't know if that's true, but I think it's interesting, because I think everything, also with the academia as a context, that's just one of all contexts that we live in or work with. And is it enough to just like contribute with that and by that? Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
I think it is super interesting, and this made me think of, because our idea was to also to touch a bit on activism in education, if there's a way of maybe teaching activism, even to share knowledge on how to think about all these things and how to become positive change agents, so to speak. And time is like going quickly, and we would like to open up the floor for some questions from the audience as well. But I would like to just ask, because there have been some ideas floating around about the potential of potentially having a course in activism. If there could be a course for, say, students at a university that would like to get tools in how to use their knowledge into pushing for change at the university or out in society. Are there, maybe let's start by asking, say you, Milan or Lisa, the students in our panel, do you see that would be meaningful to have a course like that? And what would you like that course to give you in that case?
So I think it would be really meaningful to at least have a forum to exchange our experiences, but then it would also need to have some connection to like university principles. So if you use reflection like a philosophical approach to what you do, or if you try to combine with, let's say, psychological aspects. If, for example, activism is really emotionally demanding, if you do such crazy things as protesting in the streets or engaging in civil disobedience, so some form of reflection within the university, which then gives you either new perspectives or strengthens you or gives you also new perspectives. So I think it can be a really valuable tool to have this reflection room. And yeah, there should be, I'd say at least it should be some sort of experimental setting in which you can try to develop skills or develop reflection skills and see what further might be needed, because it is so unexperienced yet, I'd say.
Thank you. Josephine.
I just have a comment. I think it sounds really interesting, and what you just said, Milan, and in terms of having these courses, I also want to now. I'm within the study of ethnology, and I think for us, everyday life is such a huge part of what we study, and I think also, of course, we can look at civil disobedience and demonstrations and all these events, and I think they are also important. But I would also say that it would be interesting to have this everyday life perspective on activism. How can we reflect on our everyday activism and how we engage in that? And also, I think an ethnographic study or approach could be really fruitful in that connection. I think for both the demonstration, the event thing, but also the like, I compost or I only wear secondhand because that's a part of my activism or whatever. And I think that could be really interesting to engage with that, and how we can also theorize on that as part of our everyday life as students or people and at the university. So it's just a comment or an add-on to what Milan just said.
Thank you. And we have some interesting things being written in the chat here as well. For instance, you mentioned, Kimberla, that you have at Luxus, there is a course in social movements. Would you like to just elaborate a bit on that? What is the aim of that course?
So that is a course that my colleagues teach, and it is from a more theoretically informed background. So, I mean, it's an academic study of social movements, and I think it is important to mention in this conversation that there's a lot of evidence that social movements really work. So that is a very important motivation for activism, that they are effective in changing policy and politics, and through mechanisms that include basically changing, I heard it described as, you want a randomly selected juror of 12 citizens, jury of 12 citizens to be sympathetic to your cause, and social movements kind of help shift the Overton window of what's considered politically possible. So putting goals on the agenda and changing public thinking around them. So the course itself is not per se practical instruction in how to conduct effective activism. That's not the purpose, but it's drawing from a range of mostly social science disciplines to look at how social movements have worked in the past, and of course to inform effective social movements going forward in supporting sustainability.
Cool, I feel like taking that course. Yes, I think we'll open up the floor for questions. Please, if you have any, or do we have any more comments? Just before doing that, do we have any more comments on this topic or on things that we've discussed before by our panel that you would like to lift? Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the question that is raised and being discussed in the chat now is quite interesting, right? Mm-hmm. A question of principle. How do we know that activism is beneficial? We are talking somewhat normatively about the value of activism in addressing our sustainability and social challenges, but it historically has not always been for the better or for progress. And I think that that's a challenge that we face in academia too, where we are a legitimizing institution. And if our research isn't critical of existing societal institutions, we can legitimize things that are also not progress. But in essence, who decides? And who decides who decides? I think that these are interesting questions, and maybe something that we can elaborate together with the panelists and those in attendance here.
Also, I would like to hand the word to Martin.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Josephine said about leaving the comfort zone, which I feel is quite important. That, maybe it's a typical Swedish thing or something, but you're not so maybe outspoken or outgoing in opinions, and or afraid of saying an opinion. So, but it's important to be able to leave that safe space in this kind of critical moment that we're in. And I think doing that stepwise, tiny steps, can be a solution to make more people active. Yeah.
And that also might refer to also what is lifted in the chat of how we can engage universities in internal ethical discussions on all this. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? While you guys think of that, I will lift one more thing then, because I think of what you said before, Milan, about how we can influence potentially curricula as students, how we can try to change. I see that as a form of activism as well. What we as students can do in influencing our education, and I know that you have some experience of doing so. Also, one ongoing maybe.
Yes, also one ongoing. But I just thought, I think that there's someone in the audience who wanted to raise a question. So I think it's Idil. So just for you to keep in mind. So I do have experience with that because my former university gave the students the possibility to attract teachers or professors to the university if they felt that a specific topic wasn't covered. So they could look for professors and co-develop a syllabus for a course. And then they had to find 10 to 15 people that were interested in it, into it, so the course could take place. And this, of course, needed some planning and also some financial support, but I think it was quite a successful thing. And I think this can be at least really inspiring for students, because then they need to persuade others that the topic they think is interesting might also benefit them. And around this discussion, they could explore what they also needed from their study program. And so you just mentioned a current experience. So in our institute, we have let's say a very well-structured program that is filled with content, and it's amazing. And still we feel sometimes that another perspective is missing. So what we did is to use the free time that the institute is offering us, 4 hours on Thursdays, to invent a new discussion forum in which we try to include degrowth thinking as a supplement to our program, and try to on the one side think about real world applications of this. So how could very abstract ideas be translated into practice, but also how can that be integrated with our program and add to our fellow students as inspiration, or at least as critical input in some of our lectures.
Thank you for that, Milan. I saw we had a question from Idil, so maybe you'd like to pose it?
Hi, I actually don't have a question, but I would like to participate in the conversation if that's okay. And I just wanted to say that there is not one activism, but there are activisms. There are forms of activisms and modes of activisms, and some of them go really well hand in hand with research, and some of them go really well within a university hierarchy. So for example, institutional activism could be quite effective, and professors can get involved in institutional activism if we understand activism as taking direct action. And for student unions are actually quite good forums for activism, because through an established entity, you can start negotiating with or putting pressure onto the university. I would suggest that we don't understand activism only as, you know, only as going on the street. There are many forms of activisms that I think are very relevant for universities and people who work and study in universities.
Thank you very much for that. I saw that Josephine has something to add on to that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Idil. My experience is that this is not easy working within these hierarchies, and not to say that it should be easy, but I think there are also these components of does the leadership agree? Does the board agree with the policies? How do they clash with other policies? I know that, for example, the travel policy that Lux are working on now is completely clashes with the internationalization policy. So what happens within the existing structures? I think yes, we can talk about institutional activism, and yes, it's important, but it's not easy, and this will need a lot of work, and I think a lot of negotiations across hierarchies. And I think that is really the important or the interesting thing, at least for me right now, to look at how does these negotiations across hierarchies take place, not just with the leadership, but also with colleagues. How will colleagues accept that? And I think there are strong wills within academia and among researchers. So how can we tackle that from this perspective? Could be also interesting to look at, because yeah, we can come up with ideas, but how does it really work when we engage in this as researchers? I think there are many issues concerning that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much for those contributions. I see we have a question from the audience, from Vincent.
Yes.
Like.
Hello. Thank you for welcoming my contribution. So yes, I'm a French astrophysicist, and in France, there is also a collective, a bit like Christian was saying, in Sheffield, that is trying to reduce the carbon footprint of French research. So it's quite developed and large. But here I will more express my opinion. I'm part of this collective, but that's not the point here. What is being defended in France currently with a strong fightings, I would say, is academic freedom. And academic freedom is part of the solution somehow, because we have the opportunity, as I'm a permanent researcher, I'm an assistant professor, and we have this freedom to decide what we want to study and to decide to organize. Also, collectively, I would say globally, at the world scale, we are almost the only community which is able to organize and communicate. I mean, I do not know, I've worked in different fields, working fields, and it's not that frequent. So an idea I'm defending and promoting in this collective is the idea of international scientist work day for future. What I mean by that is that when you're working a day during your week, you're not doing that on your free time. It's a professional work. You're not overloaded by your work because you do that on the time. At the same time, when, let's say, 1,000 researchers engage, which is 1% of total research capacity in France, this is already 1/5 of their wages, which is being invested by the state. That it's a clear investment that states do not do so much for the moment. This workday would not be done for research projects only and not for specialists. It would be transdisciplinary, because of course this question that we are raising here demands all kinds of expertise, from chemistry to social history and anthropology, because I think we could be some kind of missing link between the GIEC and the populations. That is, we should be able collectively to federate our initiatives, all national initiatives, coordinate our work, trying to make the exchanges that are not done between the populations and the states, and above all, trying to do that to protect populations. And that goes back to our legitimacy. there's a lot to discuss and to think about this legitimacy, because it's, of course, a political act that needs to be justified. And for this, we need to be in contact with the civil society that will try to survey what we do, trying to do some assembly that will be responsible to survey what we do and give some feedbacks. And we have collectively a large power that we do not use, and the name is academic freedom.
Thank you for that input, Vincent. And also, I'm happy to see that we have people joining in from more places than only Lund. Time is coming, or our time is coming to an end slowly, and I would like to invite the panel for a last round of just a quick half a minute or a minute of a takeaway round. I feel that I have a lot of new questions that have been that have arisen from this discussions of like complexity and responsibility and the role of universities in our society, or maybe activisms in academia. So I would like to invite you guys in the panel to summarize your thoughts. Maybe if you come up with I refer to what Stephen said earlier about how we can support each other in this. How can we build this context and that we need in order for these discussions to be taken further. So please, Stephen, and maybe you can give the word to someone else after you're done.
I get to choose. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just, again, and this is the challenge with these short forums, is we're just beginning a discussion. So I don't know if anybody would be interested in following up this discussion moving forward. I am grateful to see Per, our director at the Institute, active in the chat, and also recognize that it's important to engage in these ethical discussions at universities. And I see many familiar faces from the IIIE and Luxus. So I guess I hope that we can continue these discussions and discuss these values of and the role of academia in supporting or facilitating knowledge for progress in society. And you know, maybe keeping it in the Institute, I'll ask Milan to share his response or his reflections.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So yeah, I'm also a little bit overwhelmed by all the interesting perspectives of the panelists. I think I have maybe, yeah, I'm also very happy to continue these discussions. And I think as a last point or reflection, I think that this concept of the third mission of engaging with societal needs and legitimizing them through some sort of democratic process in which citizens can assess what scientists do. I think that is a crucial element that yeah, somehow for me has to be further spoken about, and how universities can at least a little bit more switch to this societal needs perspective in the future, and how activism can contribute to that. Yeah, and I would like to pass the word over to Josephine.
Thank you. It has been really interesting to follow the chat and the talk here. I think for me, it's I'm kind of realizing that within my subject, ethnology, it's a rather new research, and it's good to hear that there is such a strong research environment within these issues, and I think it creates a lot of hope. Sometimes it can feel quite lonely to be a sustainability researcher at the Department of Lux, because there are not that many. And I think what my takeaway from today is, I think there are many, but one of them is that there is really a need and willingness both from students and researchers to work more with this and discuss this more, especially the ethical perspectives of activism within academia. And I think it would be interesting to engage more in this discussion. Yeah, so that's my takeaway. And I would like to hear what Lisa is thinking.
Thank you, Josephine. And thank you all for this great conversation and for this initiative. And I think that this initiative of conversation, in a way, is really a key to all of this, because the conversation I think needs to be happening both within the academia, but also I think it's really important to not isolate these conversations. Also, I think that is like quite a big part of what activism is, because I think activism is a response to a thing in society or like in the world or psychologically or whatever that we are all in a way stand in relation to. And I think that it's great to have like conversations within the academia, as we talked of, like an ethical discussion and everything, but also like we do now, also invite people to like over from different parts and with different perspectives, respond to this phenomenon that we're all responding to in our different ways. Yeah, so thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope we can continue it many times.
Did I go?
Sorry.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I would also like to thank the organizers for inviting me and instigating this discussion. And I will not say very much further, a lot of interesting views, but I would like to just promote the Flex for Future a little bit. That is actually an opportunity to meet people that are, activists, or, would like to do more. So the plan has been first Friday every month, a meeting outside of Lux, and then just making a march and demonstration down to Stortorget. 11:40 has been the time, but due to the corona crisis, it's currently on hold, so we have not planned the next one. Will probably not be 1st of May then, which is a holiday anyway. So there is a Facebook group, which is also Flex for Future Lund. So you can go there and check and keep updated about when we meet and so on. So I hope many of you can join, and I would really be happy to continue discussions on these kind of topics further on as well. Thank you.
And over to Kimberly then.
Thank you, everyone. To answer the question, what can we do to support activism? I think it's important for us as researchers and scientists, whether we're students or more permanent position, I think, to bring the knowledge that we have from research into society. And we do have very clear evidence from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN's climate panel, that this next decade is really critical for the climate. If we're going to meet the temperature goals in the Paris Agreement, we need to cut emissions about in half in the next decade. So that is a major, dramatic, radical change if we want to be on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The world will be a much better, more beautiful, safer, more fair place if we can do that. But that does require really urgent, sweeping changes, and basically leaving fossil fuels in the ground and the social and political changes, the economic changes that go along to support that in a fair way. So I think we have a really strong scientific basis that we can't add more carbon to the atmosphere if we want a living planet, and we have a lot of work to do as researchers and as activists and working in our communities, which includes the universities, to help make that a reality. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the panel. I think that's a wrap for today. We'd like to thank the entire panel for participating, taking time out to do this, and also to the audience for participating so actively. It's super valuable, and we hope that you will be able to continue these discussions both offline and online in the future. Feel free to contact me or Josephine or anyone else for that matter after this event if you want to stay in touch. We'll drop our emails in the chat and maybe in the Facebook event. Do you want to say something concluding, Josephine?
Just very happy to have met you all virtually. And yes, let's make sure that we continue these discussions. I feel like we've, as I said, I feel like we've raised more questions than answered, maybe. So we have to continue.
Thank you, everyone.